Hello friends, I'm back with another video. If you're new here, I'm Laura and my art name is tomatoillustrates and I am a mixed media artist, and for today I'm actually going to be showing you how I paint pet portraits or animal portraits, and the basis is the same for every animal. And today I'm gonna be painting a couple of doggies. So to start off with, I usually get the photos ready. I study them to see the shapes and the colors that I might need, and then basically gather all of the information that I can from the photo that I'm going to be painting. And then I start off with a super soft pencil, a very light color one, so that I can bring in all of the super rough shapes and basically just try and get all the forms and everything ready without being too detailed with it, so I can be a little bit more scribbly and stuff. I'm going to be painting on hot pressed watercolor paper by Arches. I really find that this paper is really nice and amazing quality. It's like one of the best, and I love how smooth it is, and I love the texture that it also creates when you paint on it. So after the lighter colored pencil, I'll choose a darker colored one. As you can see, I'm going in with these like corally colors and then with like a reddish color over the top. I just want to bring in more detail with the darker color. So I usually try to only add enough detail for me to familiarize the forms. I don't try and add every single detail I can, just purely for the fact that it will get covered up with paint later on. So I do try and, make the basis of the forms, but as you can see, I'm a little bit more scribbly with these. The one on the left was obviously the first one, and so I was still getting like a little bit more familiar how to draw this. And also it's my very first chow chow that I painted, but yeah, like I mentioned, the basis is exactly the same for every animal that I paint. Usually I'm not trying to be realistic or anything like that. I never claim to be a realism artist, but this is just the way that I do it. So the paint that I'm going to be painting these with is gouache, and the specific type of gouache that I'm using is Acryla gouache. So a quick description for this paint if you don't already know what it is. So basically this paint is opaque and water resistant. So basically the best of both worlds, where you get the property of the water resistance from acrylic paint, and then you also get the matte, smoother finish with the gouache side. So it comes together like the perfect paint medium for me, especially for animal portraits. You don't want the paint to shift or lift or anything like that, and that's why acrylic would be the best. I'm not a big fan of acrylic at all. I don't like the feeling of it, and I don't like the shiny effect that it does. I'm a really big enthusiast for matte paint. So for this paint, since it dries so quickly, I use a stay wet palette. So what is a stay wet palette? It's basically like this cushion thing on the bottom, which is like a little sponge, and then you lay over some like parchmenty type paper, and you wet all of the sponge on the bottom. You make sure it's really wet, and then it kind of like absorbs into the paper, but it doesn't bring too much water into it, and yeah, it keeps your paint fresh and semi-wet so that you can keep painting with it. And specifically because of the acrylic component in this gouache paint dries so quickly, and the specific type of acrylic gouache that I'm using is the Holbein. So for the very base layer of paint, as you saw me painting over the top of the pencils with yellow and blue, so what I do for those background layers is I water down the paint. So for it's the same paint, I just water it down to the consistency of like a little bit more of an opaque watercolor, where it's still keeping pigment but it's see-through enough to see the sketch underneath. I love to do these underpaintings because they shine through and gives the painting a specific atmosphere. So depending what kind of paintings you do, it will shine through and influence the layers on top, especially if you let some of the areas shine through the thicker layers on top. And I really love this method of painting because it kind of like opens up your painting experience, because you don't have to paint every single inch, like dot per inch of the paper. You can leave some elements, you know, open without painting on top of them, which also like creates this nice looking effect, because this yellow or blue or whatever color will shine through in these little tiny areas, and it won't be as noticeable as just white paper on the background. So my first method of painting is always starting with the dark colors first. It's kind of like oil painting for me. This is how I learned how to oil paint. I would go in with the darkest details first, because you can always, you know, mix up the colors and like go over the top if it's too dark, whereas if you do it light and then try and go darker and darker, it's kind of a little bit difficult for me. So yes, so I kind of approach this with the same way as oil, where I will go with the darkest colors first, usually like a black color. I don't try and use straight up black pigment first, because it's always just black, whereas if I mix it up myself or add extra bits into the black like red or blue, it will tone it down more. Whereas like for black pigment by itself, I find it really like overwhelming and just not very versatile. So the darkest points of the portrait are always in the eyes, nose and mouth. So that is the first points I will approach every single time I paint a pet portrait. So as you can see, I pretty much finish as much of the detail for the eyes and the nose I can, starting off with. This might also look really like difficult at the same time, but it does come with time and practice. But this is just the way that I'm able to do it now, where I don't have to do everything all at once. I can piece and like choose elements to start off with. And because I wouldn't say I'm extremely experienced, but I'd say I've done over 100 portraits of animals, so I think I would be able to say that I'm getting to a point where I understand how to piece these portraits together and make them look the best in my way. Like I mentioned, I don't do realism, but I love these painterly portraits where you can still see the details, but it's not overly realistic. So I try and make the eyes and the nose and the mouth as detailed as I can, so that everything else that follows after can be a little bit rougher and a little bit more painterly and stylized. So to get back into the point of being able to piece these things together, these elements, and how to make them come together in the end, it's definitely a lot to do with color theory, which is extremely difficult when starting off with, especially as a beginner artist. However, it is possible to learn, but being realistic, you have to draw and paint to get there first. You will have to practice and practice. But the best thing is, it doesn't have to be the same subject that you paint every time to get to the point of being comfortable with color theory. So what I'm saying is, basically, you can paint buildings, you can paint plants, and you can paint animals, you can paint anything you want. It will still add to that experience of being able to pick and choose the colors from whatever subject matter you paint. It all comes down to your eye and your brain being able to understand these colors and these shifts, especially the shadows. So you have to study the shadows as well as the highlights, but I'd say the shadows are the most important because I think the shadows give so much depth to any piece that you do. And so if you start to understand shadows of a plant, you will most certainly be able to put those experiences into practice with animals. Because if you're looking at a photo, if you're studying from a photo, the reference will automatically be the same for everything else, no matter what you paint. And that's just one of the most wonderful things, because you don't have to constantly practice the same thing over and over and over again. I think that's the wrong way of approaching it. So shadows are usually very grey, and you have to study the greys to understand shadows, because each grey tone is a completely different value. It will be a reddish grey, it will be a yellowish grey, a greenish, bluish, every type of colour, it will have a dedicated grey tone, and sometimes it's a mix of different colours, and you can really study the greys in everything and the darkest parts. So it's so important that you study the shadows of the reference that you're using. So yeah, if you keep focusing on them, you will be able to discover all of the undertones within the greys, and you need to create these harmonies between the colors and the transition shades, which is so important. And yeah, with that also saying, you don't have to practice only with one art material. It's so interesting how it happens, because I've done and like hyper focused on so many different materials and so many different subjects, and it all helps in the long run. I, for a very long time last year, started focusing only on anime, and I would do anime portraits, and I would do digital, I would do, painting, I would do alcohol markers, I would do all these different mediums, and like being able to, use the skills that you learn from a certain subject into other things is what I mean. So when I was doing anime girl portraits, I started to understand the way that these professionals draw hair. These wispy, beautiful, flowy, wavy hair patterns is what also helped me be able to draw, plants, and the shapes and the curves and things really helped me understand how to position my hand and how to bring it all together. And that's exactly what I mean. You don't have to do the same thing over and over again. So bigger brushes help with loosening up the paint. So if you go in with a tiny brush first, it will be difficult to understand and loosen up later on, because if you go in with these tiny little brushes, you're only focusing on the smaller details, whereas my approach is go in with the small brush with the darkest parts of the face first, and then bring in a bigger brush to then be able to loosen up everything else. But I think that also comes with the stylization that I'm trying to achieve. And yeah, so for the background, I will usually pick a big brush as well, and then just mess around with the colors and see what I can do to basically piece it all together. And obviously it also depends what kind of a portrait you are trying to achieve. You can do a detailed background. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes if I'm doing a commission and the client wants a background to have certain things like flowers or nature, or is it it could just very well be a single color background or a gradient and things like that, but it all depends what you are trying to achieve. But yeah, usually I will, like I mentioned, go in with a big broad brush, try and lay in as much of like the colors and the transitions and everything else I can, and then I will use a small tiny brush to go back into it with more detail and try and, you know, make it look as finished as I want it to be. And for that is everything that I do when I paint animal portraits. Sometimes I do go in with a white pencil to bring in the whiskers, just because it makes sense, as brushes can be very unpredictable. So sometimes going in with a pencil is a bit more easier for me. And yeah, that is everything I do when I paint with acrylic gouache and gouache in general. This is my approach for most paint. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope to see you again. Make sure you like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it if you also turn the bell notification on so you don't miss another video. And yeah, I hope to see you in the next one. Bye guys.